meeting of March 23rd, 2021. Would you call the roll call, please?
Mr. Reiner?
Here.
Mayor Ambrose Groom? Here. Mr. Keeler?
Here.
I want to invite Brent Crawford, if he could give us an update on the Crawford Horning Bridge Park program. It'd be great to see where we're at. Brent, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. No, it's great to hear all the feedback from all the people that you've worked with down there, and they all seem to be relatively successful, even with COVID. So we're very interested in hearing what you've got to say, and you've been a great partner, really.
Yes, as well you guys have. No, appreciate it very much. Yeah, and we're generally a very open book, so don't hesitate to jump in if you've got questions and have comments. Feel free to interrupt me, but I'm just gonna speak off the cuff here and just sort of let you know, generally speaking, what's going on. So obviously right before COVID, we were sort of running on all cylinders. Revenues for restaurants in each of the restaurant cases, not each, but whether it be Condado or Local Cantina or Cap City or the Avenue, those were all the #1 restaurants or the #2 restaurants in their chain. So Local Cantina, that was the #1 local cantina in all of the local cantinas. Condado, I believe it was #2 of all the Condados. #1 Cap City. The Avenue was doing significantly better than Grandview. So they were all doing fantastically well. Our office had leased up very nicely. Residential was doing great. And when COVID hit, like a lot of businesses, certainly there was a period of time where we all, had to take a step back and wonder, what are the global impacts it's going to have on Bridge Park. And we feel very fortunate to say, really essentially 1 year later, it's had little to no impact on the overall development itself. Certainly there were individual tenants impacted more than others. And I've referenced this on other calls with some of you who've been on the calls, but when we speak to especially our restaurateurs, they still say we were #1 or 2 in the chain pre-COVID, and during COVID we were that case, and we've already come out of that being the case now. So a number of the restaurants are actually at or above their pre-COVID numbers, which is kind of amazing. And I think it's a tribute to Bridge Park and Dublin in general that even though people have cut back, Bridge Park was not one of the areas that suffered. And I know Cameron told me specifically that we had 3 of his top 4 restaurants in the United States for performance relative to the previous year's numbers, and 3 of those again being in Bridge Park. So outperforming all of his restaurants in the short north. And so we're very proud of that. There certainly from a retail perspective has been a larger struggle, but that was somewhat the case beforehand. And we knew that really going in. People would ask we want more of a retail presence. It's just a challenge in today's environment to create retail that's successful. You need a large amount of destination retail, and that's just difficult to get unless you're in a big box center like a Polaris or Easton. At this point, we obviously see what's happened to Tuttle, and so that's why we'd focused more on the restaurant entertainment aspect for Bridge Park, and I think we benefited from that because had we been essentially an entire retail destination with maybe just a few restaurants, we would have certainly had a greater impact from that. So we did have to give support. I think at the end of the day, we ended up giving about $1.2 million of support to our tenants in the way of abated rent. In some cases, and actually most of that was free rent, where we didn't require them to pay any rent for 60 days to allow them to catch their breath to figure out what the best path forward was. And some of them, like a Local Cantina in Condado as an example, didn't realize what was going to happen with takeout ordering. So their revenues were higher during that period than they were the previous quarter. So when restaurants were allowed to reopen for dining, and I believe that would have sort of been the June through August timeframe, they did more revenue during that period than they did last year, during the previous year before COVID. So obviously they didn't need any assistance. We were fortunate from an office perspective that most of our office tenants, or a significant portion, are large, either public companies or large private companies that weren't really impacted. And so they were able to continue to pay their rent. And, they were good in the sense that people weren't asking for things that they didn't need. So, Wells Fargo is a large tenant of ours. Wells Fargo didn't bother to call us, which we appreciated, to ask for rent. We wanted to offer it to groups such as Brickhouse Blue, which is significantly impacted by COVID. Because they had a lot of conference space, and corporate users were using that to augment their own space. And of course, that just essentially went to zero. And so we want to continue to help them and really anybody we can to make it through the process. There'll end up being a couple casualties. We already had that case, but we've had tenants immediately backfill those spaces, and we think that'll continue. Should there be any other losses, there'll be continued backfill. The other thing that we, we're really differentiated ourselves from the marketplace, as you've probably heard, people were very concerned about delinquencies on the residential side. That, with job loss and so forth, that there was going to be, 10, 15, 20% delinquencies. And the reality is that was true on certain product types in certain locations. We did not experience that in Bridge Park. And ironically, as an example, we had less delinquency in this September, October than we did in the previous September and October. So our delinquency remained about 1.25% to 1.5% total across all of Bridge Park, which is incredibly low. Industry standard is typically 3 to 4 just during regular times. And we attribute it to, we do spend a lot of effort, time, and money, frankly, screening our tenants ahead of time to have the highest tenant base that we can. Not discriminating, differentiating, just simply looking at credit standards, credit scores, jobs, and so forth. And so you were really unimpacted. I think maybe the most important part of this is, and we were wondering, right? So you were wondering, we were wondering, what is the impact going to be on office long term? I would say that our opinion of, from a global perspective, is that the stay-at-home element that's come out of this, we don't believe is a long-term scenario. And one of the reasons we don't believe it, one is, I'm already talking to CEOs from lots of other companies, and they're realizing the devastating effects that the stay-at-home policies have on company culture. Which is why we pretty much brought our entire company back right away and have been there since June 1st. Give or take, we did have a few fits and starts, as you might imagine, with COVID, like everybody else, but knew it was incredibly important because our company is based on culture, and it's the reason we're successful today. It's not that we have some technical knowledge that others don't. It's how everybody works together. So we're starting to see that now. The amount of calls we're getting for office in Bridge Park is still significant. There are still a lot of interested parties calling us. We are negotiating some leases right now. I do think legacy office parks, for example, we own a building in Metro Place. Those are long-term concerns that we'll have to consider. What's the long-term effect of those? Because really the office that is being leased now, it's destination office is what we consider at Bridge Park, where employees are essentially demanding a walkable location for themselves, and so it forces employers to be in those locations. And we haven't had to adjust our rents at all. And we don't intend to. We're still getting top of the market rents, and again, don't intend to adjust those at all. There is a value play for the owners of those businesses when they're located in those areas, and we have specific evidence of that, economic evidence, and that the turnover rates for those employers located in a place like Bridge Park are virtually zero. Employees don't want to leave. They like their work environment. And so there's a cost savings to that versus, I'll be honest, when I was in 555 Metro Place, it wasn't a place that I was inspired from a physical location perspective to go to every day. And if I had to go to lunch, it was down the elevator, into the car, out to the parking lot, into the car, drive 5 minutes, get out and do the same routine again. And looking out into a sea of parking wasn't inspiring. And so I know, in talking to a lot of the business owners in Bridge Park, they've told me they've been able to attract employees significantly easier than they did before they moved there. And they've retained, in a lot of cases, 100% of their employees since they came there. So there's definitely an element of that that we're proud of at Bridge Park. And then just the general walkability of it. So we're confident in, from an office perspective, that we're going to continue to lease. We're roughly 50% leased in D block, which is the newest block we finished, where North Market is. And we have already, which is amazing, we didn't start leasing apartments in D block until September 1st, approximately. And we are 90% leased in all the apartments in D block since September 1st. So that's going through the off leasing season during COVID. And still we're able to get to 90%, a lot of which, again, attributed to, I think, what we've created there, but also we have picked up a lot of residents, both out of state and residents. There's people coming from all over now. From a social media perspective, Bridge Park is relatively prominent. So when people are considering coming to Columbus, it's one of the first places they're thinking of. And then we've secondarily picked up a lot of residents from from downtown Columbus, who view us as also an urban alternative. Without maybe some of the hassles that they've seen in downtown here over the past year, parking certainly being one of them. Parking has been a critical component to that. And in some respects, it's almost more walkable than the short north. The proximity to various things and how you get to them and the ease of it has been great. So with some of those successes, given us confidence to continue on with our development plans. So Block G, which is across from the new hotel that we opened, we're pressing forward with. Obviously, you probably noticed if you've been by there that we did a lot of earthwork in late winter, which was intentional. We wanted to be ready to go into the spring. So we're finalizing. We do have to go in for some final approvals, which we're working on now, and hope to start, actual full construction here in the very near future. And it does include a large office building, which we're moving forward with. And one of it is, again, we've only got, I believe, 80-ish thousand square feet total left in D block, and there's no office space available in C block, B block, or A block. And so we only have the 80,000 in D, and of course, it takes us a couple of years to build out the G block, and so we fully expect to be fully leased by the time that block or that building opens. So we think the timing is right to make sure that we have available space there. The back side of that block is going to be for sale condominiums. They were originally scheduled to be apartments. And one of the reasons is we've had very good success with the D block condominiums flats product that faces along the river there. Those are selling very, very well and at very good prices. And there's certainly a demand for that marketplace. It's a mixture of empty nesters and families and young professionals is one of the reasons it works. You're really hitting all of the various market segments. And the timing of those, again, being ready works out well with the sellout of the rest of the condominiums that we currently have planned. Hotels are an important aspect. If anything, we do mixed use development. It creates that sort of 24-hour energy. All of those people, for the most part, are eating out for dinner, so it's great for restaurants. The AC Marriott, I think I'd said on a previous call, it just announced it here about 3 months ago, and it was just because of COVID. It was supposed to be announced in April. Was the hotel of the year in the Americas. Out of 5,000 hotels, it was the #1 hotel in all of North America, all the Americas, not just North America. And so something we're incredibly proud of. I mean, just to think that in Dublin, Ohio, it was, won the hotel of the year is pretty amazing to us. And that gave us confidence to open up the second hotel. The AC Marriott right now is basically averaging about 350% better overall revenue than its competition in the marketplace. So it has bounced back. Certainly it's not back to where it was, and we don't expect it to be for as much as another year, but it's become a destination location. Previously we were fully occupied on the weekdays from business travel, whether it be Cardinals, Wendys, Honda, and so forth. Now, we're running in the 40-50% range during the week, but on the weekends, on Friday, Saturday night, we're often now 100% occupied. And the reason is we're having people come regionally, and including people from Dublin. It's become a big staycation place. So people that literally maybe live in North Dublin, they go down there for the weekend and get a room, and obviously can walk around to the restaurants and the park and the pedestrian bridge. But it's certainly become a destination for people living an hour away, 2 hour away, that they're coming in for the weekend and realize that they have these various experiences, which we think will only be heightened, obviously, when the park gets done. The main first phase here of the park later this year, and then as the additional phases go on. Which will bring me across to the other side. And while I can't divulge any details yet, we're certainly working on plans for the old Wendys site. We think that's an absolutely critical corner to mirror sort of essentially the AC site. Not to say that it'll be the exact same building, because it will not be, but to create a presence on the other corner. So we're working actively on that, and I would expect to have some discussions about that here in the coming months. We have specific users for it that are very excited to be there, and we're going to be very excited to announce those as they come along. I think that's a good general update. I'm glad to answer any questions if I missed anything, which I probably did. But let's start. I will mention, North Market, by the way, if you've had a chance to go there, revenues for the North Market tenants are above what they had originally projected, and pretty much in all cases. And so they're doing well. I think we should be fully built out there and occupied in the next roughly 90 days or so. But I know I was there this weekend, and it was a tremendous crowd there. So it's doing very well. And I often go there, get my lunch there, and very proud. That's certainly brought a lot of traffic to the area, which has helped us for the apartment leasing. You may have noticed we moved our apartment leasing office directly across the street. And so as people are new to the market, coming to see the North Market, they can realize, hey, I can stop at a leasing office and live within Bridge Park. We certainly expect that to continue. So general update, glad to answer any questions you have.
Well, let's start out with ladies first. Mayor, Chris, do you have any questions?
No, appreciate the time, appreciate the update, exciting things. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to.
Andy, any questions? Nothing.
I appreciate you keeping us apprised, and we appreciate the partnership. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Brent, I will say that, when we started this thing years ago, it was a sweat-a-thon, and there was a whole host of people who said, the city's going to go bankrupt. This is the end of Dublin. If you guys go do this, you're going to wreck the city. And it probably, my wife said, this is maybe the finest hour you guys had in 30 years, your project. You did a lot of cool stuff here and did a lot of unique stuff. And I want to share with you, and Chris and I think Andy was at this, and I know they were at the meeting, but probably about 6-7 years ago, we hired some really high-end consultants from New York City and New Jersey. Two ladies, each run their own companies. And they came in and they came back and they saw what you guys did. And they said this, and it's really interesting. This never got out into the media, of course, but they said, we consult from San Francisco to San Diego to every major city in America, right back to New York City as consultants. And we use Dublin as the perfect model of the perfect mix of the perfect success in an urbanized, walkable city. You guys are the apex, and when we go to San Francisco, we tell them, look at Dublin. We go to San Diego, we look at Dublin. You go to Portland, look at Dublin. I don't know if you even knew this, but it was a huge feather in our cap that you guys did such a good job with it. And, knowing the restrictions we put on you and the kind of, binding elements so that, the city would be in good shape in case it did fail. You executed everything to perfection. You've been a great partner. You never reached out and asked for anything except for one time. And that totally surprised us that, that was happening. So,
and I will say on that one, that was, probably poor communication on our part, because the reality is it wasn't for us. It had no benefit to Crawford Holding. We received no dollars from it. It was really to prevent us from levying a charge that would have then required all the individual condo owners and the retail tenants to pay additional funds. That was all we were really trying to accomplish. It literally was zero benefit to Crawford Holding, and that was the reason we were doing it. But fortunately, it worked out in the end, and it wasn't necessary anyway. But I'll just utter a lot of what you said. Certainly, as I kind of mentioned earlier, it's not rocket science what we do. There's nothing new that we created. It's generally about execution. I will say that it requires good old-fashioned guts on both sides. You guys obviously had to have a belief that we could pull it off. But I think the result is, for both of us, it's been fantastic for the city in many respects. I know I do calls, at least a couple times a week from people all over the country now calling to ask about the model. They're coming to visit, to see it. Even those are generating dollars to the city. These people are coming and they're staying at the AC. They're experiencing here. And I definitely talk a lot with them about, and a lot of it's municipality related, where they're saying, how does this happen? I said, well, it's absolutely has to be a partnership between private and public to pull it off, because if either of those elements are missing in any way, it just doesn't work. It's very difficult. And, we're not afraid to work through difficult challenges, and we almost get more excited by it. So the more difficult the challenge, often the more we like it. I won't say it was, this certainly had its significant challenges, but we're proud of it. And living in Bridge Park and working in Bridge Park, there's not a day that I get up and look out my window from either my condo or from the office and feel proud and humbled by it, and just glad to be part of it.
No, I think, what, I want to congratulate you. I know we chased up and down, and you chased up and down for a grocer in there. And then working in the market was just brilliant. And it's a beautiful, I hope it fills up the last couple spaces. But that's really a beautiful addition. And I hope everybody goes out and supports those businesses, and keeps that running.
Yep.
Probably on a personal level, ever since I was a kid, I went to Europe first time I was 7. I always wanted a walkable city in America. The French market, as you recall, was sort of neat, but it was really cheaply done, poorly executed. And, we had a visionary city manager at one time that went along with all this. And so to see us have a walkable city, like the 15 times I had gone to Europe and got to walk around, to see us have our own walkable city is amazing. And I got people that are living in some of your condos, which are $1 million, are just raving about their lifestyle there. And these are people I really respect. I've known my whole life. They're CEOs and really superstar corporate guys. And they were so happy to be down there, and not and not downtown. You think the baseball field would have drawn them, but the risk of taking an urban setting and pulling it all the way to the suburbs like you did, and we did together was crazy. And it was a high risk adventure. And people said, well, this thing's going to fail. It ain't going to work. You're not going to get the kids up here, but we did need the income producing kids to fill up our offices like Cardinal. We needed those IT kids. And it was a survival move really for the city to build.
And I will say that's one of the most common things that we hear is parents here, and a lot of them are my friends, they have, my kids are out of college and one is a senior in college. And the kids who essentially said pre-Bridge Park or pre the Bridge Street district had never considered moving back to Dublin at all, was not even a thought on their radar, but now their kids are moving back here. And most of them living in Bridge Park, and they're so happy, the parents are, that their kids decided to come back. But obviously those are the people we need here to then buy the housing stock that we have in the Muirfields and other neighborhoods up there. And those are the ones that are going to do it. And so I applaud the city obviously for starting the process so long ago. And it's amazing to think when we started this back in, at least from our perspective, acquiring the first property in 2012. But really the construction didn't start until 17. So I think, we've all accomplished a lot together in a short time frame.
It was amazing. That city leapt up out of nowhere. It was amazing. So, congratulations. And again, on behalf of all the people of the city, 47,000 people, the city council, the city staff, you've done an amazing thing here for us.
Appreciate it very much.
It's really cool.
Same for us, obviously. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Any other comments from the committee? No. Brent, we're going to let you go back to work and try to make some money and straighten out all the problems of running that corporation. Which
thank you.
I know
Appreciate
it's
it.
No.
Good to see you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye. See you.
Bye-bye. Okay, our next item on the agenda will be maintenance of historical significant stone walls. Megan O'Callahan's going to lead this discussion, I take it. Megan, are you out there?
I am out there. However, it's going to be Jenny and Bob tag teaming this presentation.
Okay, Jenny and Bob.
And allow me to introduce Bob. So Bob Taylor is the city's infrastructure asset management engineer, and he was recently promoted to director of a division that's a little broader than infrastructure asset management in the operations area. So I believe this is the first time he's presenting to council. So
welcome, Bob.
Yes, thank you. Happy to be here.
take it away.
Okay. So as you stated, this is a discussion related to the historic stone walls and how those should be handled. We have some background that we provided within your memo, and then I was going to review some of that briefly, and then Bob's going to chime in on some of the pieces that he has expertise in, and we've really all worked very collaboratively on providing you with the best information that we can, so we can get some guidance on how to move forward with some of these unique situations. So as we highlighted in your memo, the historic and cultural assessment was accepted by council back in 2019, and that looked at a larger review of all the historic and cultural assets within the city, which included the built environment as well as landscape features, archaeological sites. Particular to our discussion tonight, there is recommendations and information as part of that assessment that really focused on stone walls in particular, and the consultant as part of that assessment conducted and provided appendices, which we attached for your reference, that really gets into detailed information and an individual survey of each of these stone walls. And that information, as I mentioned, we provided for you. So as part of their assessment, they conducted a larger inventory. So they looked at each of the stone walls that were out there and classified them initially broadly between 8 categories, but then ultimately refining that down to 3, with the 3 major categories being our traditional dry laid stone walls with that very vertical element to them. And it does include those that had repairs to them as well, which may have been a little bit more non-traditional in the way that they were repaired, but ultimately they look very much like our traditional stone walls. So that first category encompasses all of those. I have some pictures here and I can show you some examples in a second. But then the second category is this more atypical one. So it doesn't fit that traditional definition. It does in some instances have aspects of that, but it doesn't truly fit that traditional dry laid design. And then the third is new walls that we constructed to look like the traditional walls. So this first image then shows some examples of those traditional walls and what that character looks like. And then the second photo shows some different variations of that. And again, you'll see that they sometimes have similar elements, but they don't exactly replicate what our traditional walls look like. And then we have some of our newer ones, which look similar, but obviously were built in a more contemporary time frame, so they don't exactly meet the historic piece of that. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Bob so he can talk through what we've done on the city side and how this information all sort of fits together and completes our puzzle here.
Thanks, Jenny. So we took that assessment that Jenny was talking about and merged that with our data in GIS to make a more comprehensive inventory of all the walls. The walls and the inventory include private walls as well as city-owned walls, and that includes walls within the public right-of-way. The public walls are inspected annually for condition. And then the assessment included a rating from 1 to 3, with 1 being the highest, considering the integrity and the historical significance of the walls. Are you driving still? There we go. Here's a screenshot of our GIS wall inventory. So the pink walls are the public walls and the orange walls are private. Certainly this is an interactive. I just want to give you a screenshot of it. We can calculate, then we can take the walls and calculate any sort of statistics we need from them, like length and numbers and materials and that sort of thing from the inventory. But we do have a live inventory of this that we can use. So there are 3 main locations of the walls. The walls that are within the public right-of-way. So you can see the light pink line there is the parcel line, and then the pink line is where the arrow is pointing to is actually the location of the wall. And even though these are in public right-of-way, I did want to include this picture. Some people actually incorporate them into their own personal landscape as well. So that's kind of another thing that needs to be considered when we talk about maintenance of these walls. The second location type is essentially completely on private property. And those are generally perpendicular to the roadway. And then the third type is where this gets a little more complicated. It's where the wall may meander in and out of and across the parcel line. So part of the wall's on private property, part of the wall's on public right-of-way, or else it's very close and almost difficult to determine. So I looked at all those instances, of which there's approximately 28, and I tried to classify those into the historical significance of the walls. So where we have the situation where the historical significance is 1, we have 13 of those locations. And where it's 2, we have 5 of those locations. And then where it's 3, there are 10 of those locations. Jenny, thank you.
Sure. So in addition to the data that we had from the assessment and that Bob and his group have done, we also did some additional research and reached out to our historic preservation architect that helps us in reviewing of our development projects within a historic district, just to have her provide some reference material to help guide our discussion, which when Bob was doing his benchmarking was consistent with what he looked at. So again, it's largely dealing with, walls and buildings in general, not necessarily specific to the dry laid stone walls, but looking at how to preserve those. So she provided a lot of expert information just for our reference. In addition, you'll notice that Mr. Holton is here in case the committee wants to have some discussion or ask him any questions about the walls in particular and their input as well. So we want to make sure that all that information is provided for you. And then I also wanted to highlight within the zoning code update that was just completed for the historic district, the code does stipulate in there that existing walls, stone walls, should be preserved. And then the draft guidelines, which have not come before council yet for approval, include the following recommendations, which is original walls should be retained, historic walls should be preserved, and that degraded stone walls should be rehabilitated without compromising the integrity and character. And in the instance where replacement of historic stone walls are needed, then new walls are discouraged. But if that has to happen, ultimately a traditional stone wall type would be preferred. So that's our current guidance that we are bringing forward as part of the guidelines. And then the last piece of information is the potential cost estimate, depending on council's direction, just for your awareness, that if we were to install new walls, we're provided this sort of cost layout just so you can understand what the cost of that is per linear foot. So obviously the taller the wall, the more expensive that gets. We do have a little asterisk because again, this is for new wall construction. So if we're repairing existing stone walls, the cost of that would be potentially half, a little more than half. But again, you require someone that has specialized experience to make that happen. So again, just want you all to understand how that fits in the grand scheme of the total linear feet of the walls that we are potentially talking about and what the cost might be associated with that. So in terms of the discussion tonight, we really wanted to get some feedback from the committee about maintenance responsibilities for historically significant walls that are located in that situation where Bob showed where it's partially on city property, partially in the right of way, partially on private property, how to handle that, as well as should then, if we're deciding to maintain these, is that be matching what is within the historic guidelines in terms of how to apply and repair or preserve the walls that are historically significant. And then looking for some direction about should these historically significant stone walls that are located in the right of way, if something more significant repair needed to be done, should those be reviewed by the Architectural Review Board prior to coming to City Council as part of your typical annual CIP projects or bid acceptances. So with that, I'm available to answer any questions as well as Bob, and then JM Rayburn is here too, as he did some of the data and research on the staff side as well.
Well, let's start out with our guest, Tom, down in South Carolina. You have any questions? Don't want to keep you from your vacation, so we want to get you through this.
You're muted, Tom.
Tom, you're muted.
Tom, you're muted. Tom?
Okay.
There you go.
Okay.
We
Sorry.
can hear you now, Tom. Thank you.
Somebody muted. Okay. Okay. I have, at Megan's suggestion, I reached out to the Historical Society Board and asked them for as much input in as short time as possible. And there are only a few of the members who are familiar enough with the walls and the historic district all over to give me some input. So most of this is mine because of my tenure and my wandering around the historic district in the city. So, and I've tried to develop all the input. I've focused on a couple of, a number of things, looking at your discussion topic questions. For example, maintenance responsibility for historical significant stone walls. Looking at the massive size of this project, I looked at the walls from the standpoint of what are historical significant. I looked at gateway walls. What are the walls that are most historically significant fall in two categories. Those that are within the historic district, mostly I'll call it downtown, if you will, just for shorthand, and those that are in gateway, those approaches to the city, Dublin Road, Riverside Drive, the Dublin Cemetery, as people who are approaching the city And we want them to associate the Stonewalls with Dublin, which are part of our signature. That's on the city logo. So we associate Dublin with Stonewalls of Dublin. So gateways, Route 161, Dublin Road, Riverside Drive, Bridge Street, all the cemeteries, of course, plus the other outlying cemeteries, Sandy Corner, Mount Zion, and others, Veterans Park, of course, and so stone walls around the park, Cisco Park, Scioto Park, and others. So we have a number of significant places where the stone walls should be repaired, restored, and maintained. So those between gateways and historic district, those are the ones that should get the most attention under maintenance responsibility that are in both the city's right of way and on city. Most of those, I guess, are city property. Private property, of course, is another thing altogether. And let me find my note here. Number 1, 5 and 6. I bounced around here. One of the board members has stone walls on her property, and she said she has repaired the stone walls on her property and believes it's her responsibility to maintain the walls on her property. However, other people don't do that now, and perhaps there should be a way, I'm not sure how this is done, for proper maintenance of your stone wall on your property to be put into the deeds or covenants or whatever the property documents are. So they'd be grandfathered today, but in the future, anybody who's buying property in the historic district or anywhere else has to maintain those walls. The standards by which those walls have to be maintained would be defined in the guidelines of the guidelines of ARB or the guidelines that Jenny mentioned earlier. 66666. And then the other wild idea I came with first which would be outrageous, for the city to seize the walls on private property, restore and repair them, then turn them back to the owners with a preservation easement. I liked that idea when I first came up with it, but then the city, I knew John would like that. But then the city would get sued for giving a property over that would increase my appraisal value, doing something that I don't want them to do. So that would be outrageous. Number 2, should the maintenance practices outlined in the draft historic guidelines be applied, located in public right of way? Should the original stone walls be retained, etc.? Number 2, it seemed to me that Washington and Perry Townships probably share in the interest of some of this. If we maintain or improve stone walls, both Washington and Perry Townships have walls like Perry Township, primarily the Pioneer Cemetery over where the Davis Cemetery, also called Pioneer Cemetery, that is in Perry Township. So that's the only one I could, well, there are quite a few others. Well, Cisco Park and Scioto Park. So Perry Township should share in the maybe as a partner in grants, if grants are considered as a way to fund this. But if there's a way to prioritize, possibly some walls may be on the point of repair or restoration, but stones could be salvaged. It's a tough decision. So some stone walls might be, I'll call it sacrificed, if they are too far gone, but salvage some of the stone and then move that stone into to repair or restore other walls that can be repaired. unless, but if the wall is in a gateway, that definitely has to be repaired, restored, and improved, repaired or restored. The last one should impacts us, it has to do with the ARB. ARB definitely has to be involved, of course, within the historic district, because anything that affects the walls within the historic district affects the historical character of the residents of the property, and the residents need to have some comment on anything that affects their the character of the district. So the residents need to have a method, a means by which they have comment. The word informal bothers me a little bit on discussion topic 3, where it says be reviewed informally by the ARB. Having touched ARB for many, many years, sometimes those informal reviews get a little bit of unstructured. And I would say that they should be encouraged to have a more tight deliberation guidelines for any informal review anytime, but especially around the walls. So I'll stop there and see if I've been sufficiently vague to prompt some questions.
Tom, I just have, from the earlier part of your discussion, you know, you were talking about walls around cemeteries and other things like Chewchescu Park and stuff. Now, are you suggesting that we add these walls, or is this back to the maintaining what we've got? Is this a long-term program where you're thinking to define our city with a specific, you know, emblem, aka Stonewalls, Irish Stonewalls? So I wasn't sure what you were recommending there. Is that a program to continue Stonewall building in some of these entry areas? Or is that just, are we back to maintaining and trying to keep up with what we got?
Thank you. Not adding walls.
Okay.
Just picking the walls where they are. I would, the only situation where I would suggest creating a wall, I'll give you a good example. Right in front of, or between Indian Run Drive and Emerald Parkway, there is a very worn down wall on the west side of the road. It is one of the in the assessment, cultural assessment, describes it as one of the oldest walls in town. It's in front of Tom Monahan's house, and it's it's almost to the ground, but it's supposed to be a very old wall. I would rebuild that because one reason it's a gateway. So that's one where it exists, but it needs to be rebuilt because it's a gateway and it's only on one side of the road. But I would not, in any case, suggest building a wall where one does not exist today.
Okay.
And another, go ahead.
No, please.
Oh,
Please.
the other suggestion is that there might be a case where somewhere around the Dublin region, someone is, let's say planning and zoning gets a case where someone is has a stone wall, and they are out, maybe in town, maybe outside of town, and they're going to breach that stone wall because of the development. And so let's save the stone and put it in a stone warehouse for use somewhere else. But the stone would always be salvaged for city use somewhere else.
Well, Tom, can I ask you a question before? I know this is sort of my feelings that if the stone wall's on a private property, that it should possibly be maintained by that person. I mean, that's one thing. If it's a wall that weaves in and out from public domain to private, then I think the city should be involved with it. And of course, if it's in the public domain, I think the city is responsible for maintaining it. What's your feelings on those three critical issues?
The only approach I could think of in a case like that is that the city would maintain its portion and assist the private property owner with funding with grants or something to upgrade that person's portion of it. But that could be a long-term enterprise, and the person may refuse.
Yeah. No, that's an important part of our city, and I see that, and I hire these same guys. We have these Irish stonemasons, we actually have two of them, and the city uses them for different projects, and I use them also myself. And there's a great book written on how to lay a real Irish stone wall, and if you want some interesting reading, it's an old book, but it's really a neat book. So, okay, well, let's get into the committee. We're going to start out with ladies first, so we're going to ask the mayor what her comments are on this. Chris, please.
I think we should probably look at legislation that require maintenance of historically documented in the city, and we should do a code update, and they should be required to maintain them to the satisfaction of the city. I think for our own personal walls, they should be remedied to make sure that they do not continue to degrade and fall apart. So we should keep them, and we should have however many feet, I'm making up numbers here, say we have 10,000 linear feet of stone walls, 1/7 of those walls every year, whatever, should be identified and maintained and upgraded, or whatever is appropriate. We have a lot of problems with the stone walls along Riverside Drive because of the dry laid nature of the stone walls and the heaviness of the vehicles and the speed at which they travel down those roads. There's a lot of vibration that happens that causes those fault walls to fall apart. So although I appreciate the dry laid appearance of these stacked stone walls, there are areas of town where it is certainly just not applicable. Because it isn't sustainable, and so we need to deal with those things and make up our minds how we want to treat them and treat them accordingly. I will disagree with Tom. You know how much I love you, Tom, but I'm going to disagree with you. I do think we should continue to build stone walls because they will not always last forever, and different developments over the course of time will remove various portions of stone walls in the city. So I would be very supportive of continuing to build stone walls in the city. I was pretty vocal about that in the grounds of remembrance and places like that. And I think that those walls really contribute to the character of the area. And I would be very supportive of continuing to do that in the future and making that a line item in our budget. I agree that we need to pay special attention to those walls in the historic district gateway and parks, because those are where people interact with them in the closest proximity. So that's certainly when we talk about this rotation of maintenance and inspection, those would be the first ones in our 7 or 10 year plan. And I think I answered all the questions. That's all I have. Thanks.
Quick interruption. I would, when I said don't build new stone walls, I meant don't build stone walls as replicas of the old ones. Thank you for allowing me to clarify. I know you're going to continue to build new stone walls like the ones on the multi-use path on South Dublin Road. But when I was thinking new stone walls, when John asked, I was thinking of the would you build new walls as replicas of the old stone walls? And I'd say
I wouldn't necessarily
do that.
be offended by building stone walls in a similar fashion to the actual historical stone walls, if that was appropriate for the area. But yes, other stone walls. If you drive down Riverside Drive, you see, Paul Jelpy, I don't know, 30 years ago, built stone walls across his property frontage there that are different from the stone walls that are there at the Arts Council, right? And there's different walls along different properties. You know, the one on the Arts Council, that's the real deal. You know, that's the real McCoy there. That is a traditional actually historic stone wall. But they look nice together. It gives a nice feel for the community, and you know, there's a little bit of inconsistency, but it's a blended inconsistency. You know, limestone is not going to last forever. Particularly Ohio limestone is not going to last forever this side of the earth. You know, Indiana limestone, a lot of the other limestones are far more durable materials than the Ohio limestone. So, you know, there are going to be times if we want to keep these historic walls, we're going to have to introduce new stone because there's only so much of it and it does degrade over time. So I do like the idea of having a stone repository somewhere in the city that we could place actual historic stone when we have the opportunity to do so. I think that's wise. And as long as we can use that, I would prefer to use that. And in the event that we can't use that, it doesn't ruin my day. I mean, because listen, all the limestone's the same age, right? It's just how long's it been in the weather. So we're not making new limestone today, right now in Dublin. So, you know, it's going to be, you know, it's like us. Every day we're one day closer to death, right? Stone's the same way. It's one day closer to dust. So, if we can, I would use new stone wall. If we I would use existing actual historic stone. In the event that we can't, I would use newly mined stone, probably of the same age of the stone that's there, and just allow time to take its toll. I think Megan or Jenny and Bob, thanks for joining us today. Sorry, I did not welcome you, but appreciate that. I believe I answered the question.
Thank you.
Hey, Chris, I just want to say, keep in your mind the first part of the message that you delivered, because I think that would be a recommendation for council. And I noticed that Mr. Keeler's head was bobbing also, and I'm in agreement with that. And that could be a recommendation for council as they're going to ask us, you know, what we decided here this afternoon. So keep that in mind. And Mr. Keeler.
So I don't know that I'm going to cover any new ground. I think you guys have all done an adequate job. I would just say I'm preservationist, and I believe in preserving what's worthy of preservation, and not every wall in the city of Dublin that's on this inventory is worthy of preservation, nor should it be our responsibility to do so. So the first question I would ask is does it have historical significance? Is it in the historic district, or is it on the property of a contributing historic property that falls under ARB's purview? If the answer to those questions is yes, then those walls should be maintained according to the second bullet point in your considerations, following the Architecture Review Board code and design guidelines, using, as Chris said, if we have, you know, a clearinghouse of historic stone. I think, as Chris pointed out, they're all the same age, but some have historical significance. They were put in a place by some mason 100 years ago. That's very different than a wall that was constructed 20 years ago. I don't have any strong feelings about a stone wall on someone's property that is not in the historic district that was constructed 20 or 30 years ago. I don't believe it's our place to tell a homeowner what they can and cannot do. So I would say for the folks that are within the historic district or own a historic property with a historic stone wall on it that have concerns about maintaining it, the dollar values that were assigned for the various heights of stone walls, that's what the city pays for prevailing wages. That is not what a resident would pay to hire one of John's Irish stonemasons to dry lay stone. So we can be a resource to those residents, and certainly when they come before the Architecture Review Board, we can guide them on how they would do that. I think Tom started with gateways and cemeteries and all that stuff. I think that goes without saying. If it's on city property, it's city's responsibility. You maintain it to the standard that it was constructed originally. So if it's a historic wall, you use old stone and you use old methods to lay the stone. If it's in a park and was let's say in front of the current city hall or the old city hall, I guess it is, those stone walls were put in 5-10 years ago. Maintain them according to that standard, using that kind of material. The atypical stone walls, I suppose, if there's an atypical stone wall on the property of a historic contributing property in the historic district, I guess it should be maintained according to the atypical standards. It doesn't necessarily match, the majority of the walls around Dublin and the identity of the stone walls in Dublin. But those are my thoughts. If you have a wall that meanders, I guess this is a gray area from city to private and maybe back again. I think that's a tough one. My understanding is, as an example, when the city plants a pine tree in a public right of way, the homeowner that is adjacent to that pine tree maintains and cuts around that pine tree, right? So it's the city's property, but maintained by the homeowner. Is that correct?
In some cases, we have Muirfield, we have different, which is almost a quarter of the city. And so we have different things on that. I mean, I will tell you that in northwest Dublin, if trees are planted and you can plant trees on the right of way that belongs to Muirfield and the city or whatever, you're expected to maintain them, but you're allowed to do that because it enhances the general good of the community. And that's the general feeling that, this is a beautification effort. And as you know, from all these other meetings we've had about entryway landscapes and stuff, they're really sitting on our right of ways and stuff. We are encouraging the community, the HOA, to go ahead and, do those things. And we're actually giving them money to try to upgrade the overall aesthetic of our.
Andy, I think the difference might be easements versus city-owned property. If it's in an easement, then it is owned and maintained by the owner, versus city-owned property. There's a lot of easements along. That's like ditches up and down Dublin Road, or even up and down Brand Road, right? There is an easement in there, but the city has an easement, but they don't own it.
Got it. Okay, that's a tough one. Tom suggested a grant or something like that. I think Chris, maybe you said it's the homeowner. Again, if it's a historically significant wall on a historic contributing property that falls under ARB's purview, it's the homeowner's responsibility to abide by those guidelines. And so I would say it's on the homeowner. The city can certainly say, there are stonemasons that would do this work for less than what the city paid. Not that we want to quote fees, but we can say the city would pay this as a point of reference. We suggest you make some calls to private stonemasons, and their rates will be significantly lower than the rates that the city pays. Something like that.
Well, before we get back to Chris's recommendations, which I thought were really good, things to send up to council, let's go over the big three amongst ourselves, so we could have a recommendation ourselves. So we're saying that, yes, the city, we all just, thumbs up or down on this. The city maintains the ones that we're responsible for in historic districts and in parks and everything else. Are we as a team in agreement with that? Send that on.
Okay. City property.
Yes. The next thing is, we might have some divergent opinion. If the wall weaves back and forth between private and public land, is the city responsible? I would think maybe so, but I don't know how do is that a killer or on this recommendation? What do you think?
I probably would just say if it's a historic wall and if there is a portion of it that is on city property, city would maintain it on the parcel that the wall is resting.
Okay, are we in agreement with that? So that can be sent up to us. And then the third thing is, does someone maintain these walls? You know, you buy a historic house, it's got an Irish stone wall running down the front of it. Do we mandate that they take care of that wall as part of their, you know, general landscaping? I'd have to say.
Yes.
I'd say
That's
yes.
that is part of, you know, you go down in the brewery district, you go down in, you know, German Village, wherever you want to go. That's part of it. That's part of the cost of living.
And that's
If I
actually
had to
in the
answer-
code. Sorry if I can interrupt for 1 second.
Yeah.
That is in the code you just adopted, that existing stone walls, what shall be preserved. So I think with that new code, we can be more proactive for private property owners, that the expectation is that you are maintaining your wall, and we can provide those resources.
Okay.
You know, we're losing little pieces of history in the city. You know, there was the house there down on South Riverview that had the whispering hole, right, for the slave trail, right, and freedom trail, and that's gone from that house now. You know, we
Yeah.
can't let. Is it not gone? Is it just planted over?
No, it's just partially hidden by the bushes.
I
Right.
mean, I guess my point is you used to be able to see it plain sight
Yeah.
and be able to point at it to somebody from the street, and you can't do that today very
Right.
easily. And I think we don't want to trespass on anyone's property and start, you know, digging through their bushes. But you know, we those are important things.
Yeah. And then, you know, the same thing, Chris, with your father and the Devil's Hole, where they excavated the skulls of the Indians. And it was a shame that when we acquired that land, we didn't acquire the other side of the creek and control the Devil's Hole, because that is such a fascinating piece with 6 skulls of dead Indians that were taken out of there, and that had some kind of ritualistic thing. So, you know, before we leave this government, we should still try to move to control that, because that is, when you cross under Indian Run Bridge and you go under the River Road and you come out on the other side there where the Devil's Hole is and all that history, and that's where they found a rattlesnake pelt that was 6 feet long and 1.5 feet wide, and you know, all that cool history. And Ohio State has our Indians that they excavated out of there. You know, all that is just great history and got to be preserved. You know, it really has to be. So,
Well, if you don't want to allow an alternate history to be written, you have to preserve what actually happened.
right. So we're in agreement technically that these 3 things. Andy might be a dissenting vote, but okay, so we can move on with that. No, no, he's a positive vote. So we're going to pass that on to City Council. Now, Chris, you made some interesting recommendations when you started your discussion. Do you want to repeat those, and we should have a motion on those?
Are you referring that continue to build new stone walls, or I'm portion I started with is that we need to have a cycle of maintenance on these, and it probably needs to be a budget item. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, that was a good suggestion, I thought, and something we should, same thing with the landscaping, because you know, as our landscape ages and as it was blocking out the backs of hundreds of houses, and now you're starting to see the backs of houses, and the pine trees have been here for 30-40 years, and the drive isn't quite as lovely as it used to be.
Well, this goes to my same point about parkland, the parkland acquisition fund, right? So these funds are important, because if we don't have the funds in place, you can say, well, we could always use from this fund, or we could always use from that fund. Well, that's true, but then you have to decide to not do something else. So I think these funds are important if we want to have a historic wall maintenance fund, right? And we have an aging landscape upgrade fund. We don't have to go look for money. And we don't have to say, well, let's not repave Billy's Road this year because we're going to fix this stone wall. No, the money's there to fix the stone wall. You fix the stone wall and you do Billy's Road.
So, Mr. Keeler, are you in agreement with the maybe having a fund set up to replace walls, and we could recommend that to City Council?
Now I'm raising my hand if you don't mind
Megan,
allowing me to
right
chime
in
in.
there.
So much of what Bob spends the majority of his time on is the asset management program, and he developed a very sophisticated program several years ago. And since the development of that program, he's been tackling all of our assets one by one and incorporating them into the program. And that program includes inventory. Number one, that was a big task to inventory all of our assets citywide, and he has done a great job with that, working with planning and others. So we have pretty much every asset inventoried now in GIS, and that dashboard that he showed you for the walls, you know, it outlined the linear feet and showed where we have lots of those dashboards for all of our assets. So that was step one. Then he developed and Bob could be explaining this better than me, but I'll continue on. Then he identified and developed a routine inspection cycle. So each of those assets, he has an inspection schedule, and a certain, you know, not every asset gets inspected every year, but it depends on the risk and the condition and all that stuff. So he has all that established for all the assets in the right of way and city-owned assets. Then he determines the condition, he assesses the condition of them, and then he develops either a work plan for our in-house forces to maintain them, or if we're not able to maintain them used in our in-house forces, then we tackle that discussion, contracting it out as part of the CIP. So a few years ago, when he did get to the inventory and the asset management for retaining walls citywide, he identified all these more decorative walls that aren't necessarily retaining earth behind them. And we do have a line item in the CIP for maintenance of walls. It doesn't specifically call out historic walls, but these could be included in that maintenance line item. And as he started developing work plans for those funds, that's when we came to the question of, okay, what do we do? Primarily why we're here having this discussion is we needed some direction on, you know, what do we do with those walls that meander in and out of public right of way and private property? Because we typically don't expend city resources maintaining something on private property. So that's a little bit more of the background and a glimpse into Bob's life working for the city.
Yeah, and furthermore, a couple of comments I'd like to make on the walls. And so then another decision we had to make, and this is why we were looking for guidance, is like if something's historic and the wall has started to lean or it's fallen down, you know, in some historians' eyes, they leave it as such because it's historic. So I essentially wanted guidance on it. Are we going to repair these walls, you know, make them look as they were when they were first erected, or do we let them be how nature wants them to be? So, and I think this discussion, I think I'm going to get a clear definition on how the city wants to handle those. The only other thing I want to mention on maintenance is specifically these dry laid stone walls, is that they may start to lean a little bit, but for the most part, nothing happens, then they fall. So it's kind of, there's like, in many cases, there's little warning before something happens to these walls. So it's a little, you know, any other asset I'm dealing with, that I see warning signs, I see trends, I see things starting to happen, but these walls are a little unique in character from the standpoint of that their failures are a little more sudden than other assets we deal with. So I just want to point that out, that, you know, we may be saying, hey, this wall's good, and then next year it fell over.
Well, you seem to see it, you typically see them fall in the springs, right? Because you're having a lot of moisture in the soil, and so you're having some expansion there, but also you start, particularly the ones along roads. I mean, the trucks now, they just have so many axles on them, and the weight is so great that the road may stay intact. Megan could speak to this far greater than I could, her engineering background, but the vibration of the roadway with the dry laid stone, it just jiggles them enough that they're going to fall apart. So I don't know. I agree with you, Tom, that I would like to see their construction maintained for you know, a purity standard, right? That they were built in the same manner that they were originally built. I don't know how realistic that can be, particularly along road thoroughfares that vehicles travel at a greater rate of speed. You know, if those trucks are going 45 miles an hour adjacent to that stone wall, for me, I would be supportive of having it have a dry laid appearance, but that it would be tacked together with mortar, just so that we can preserve it better than we could otherwise. And there may be differing opinions here, but I would be okay as long as the appearance was consistent, that we added a little more integrity to the wall itself.
Let me
I
ask
agree.
you. Let me ask you a question, or Andy, I need your comment because Chris has voiced hers on this question that Bob brought up. Do we, if the wall, they fall apart in sections, by the way, as we all know. Do we rebuild them, or do we let them historically look interesting caving in?
I think it's a philosophical question. So different. It's a matter of opinion or taste, I think. I'm in favor of letting it go. And when
Okay.
it falls, you have to rebuild it.
Okay.
Councilmember Fox, I know, she was, I think, concerned that if the city were to rebuild a historic wall, they would do so using new stone. And I think that it was either her or Mayor Grooms that had this idea: we stockpile. If a historic wall is destroyed for some reason, development or something, we keep a stockpile of that stone, and that stone is used to restore a historic wall that has fallen or whatever. But I'm okay just kind of letting it work with nature until it's clear that it's gone beyond its life.
Chris, are you in agreement with that? And so we can pass that on.
Yeah, I think so. And I think when we have opportunity to reclaim some weathered stone, we should. I think we probably had a lot of opportunity with that, with the construction of the pedestrian bridge. A lot of those places, I mean, all they did was pick up the stone that was in the field. It was not, wasn't anything really special stone. So when we have the opportunity where we have some exposed stone, we should capitalize on it. But I agree with Andy.
Okay, so we're all in agreement, and that answers your question, Bob, right? Okay, so we can pass that on to the city council as a vote. I just want to make a couple comments about stone walls. One time I was hired by the richest man in Ohio, I think you all know who he is, to build some stone walls that hadn't been built since the 16th century. And they came from Versailles, and it was a very interesting exercise in that he knew that those stone walls would last 400 or 500 years if they were built correctly. And that's the way we executed them. We took rough limestone and sanded every piece down so you couldn't fly typing paper into them. And they went like 8 feet up into the air, and then we buried 4 feet of them in the earth. And it was a really interesting exercise in how this is all done. And that goes back to maybe when we lose our Irish guys, that they read this book about how to lay stone walls, because dry laid stone walls with the correct base underneath them with freeze and thaw will move up and down to the end of time if they're laid correctly, or at least for a couple hundred years. So I'm a big believer in being an expert in this and understanding how they're built and that they can last. And it's going to be tough because in the future, we're not going to have the kind of technicians that we've had in the past that know how to do this. And how they're laid is very complicated correctly when they're dry laying them. So just some, sidebar comments on stone walls and our future, since that's, our logo in a way. So I think Megan, did we cover everything? And Tom, do you have anything you want to add?
Just thought I'd just add this, the pictures that Jenny had right at the beginning are of the walls, show the ones down by the car barn on South High Street. And Herb Jones, and all of you probably remember Herb, said that those probably are the oldest intact walls in Dublin. Those are from the old Wright farm, Daniel Wright farm. And that the car barn goes back to 1877. So those walls might be the oldest intact walls. And you can see right close to the, and they're across from the Snaufer quarry. So those walls you can see, back to Andy's point, they're starting to cave in at one point, right across from Short Street. And so we're talking about which wall is going to fail. That wall will probably fail first of the oldest walls. You can start to see where it's collapsing right across from Short Street. And And so that'll be the interesting one to watch. Now, up and down, back to Jane Fox's comment, that wall would be the best one to preserve if possible, but that one is going to go. And then across from Waterford Drive, up by 181 South High, that's a continuation of the same wall from the farm right up in front of the Carr house at 181 South High, 167 South High. So that used to be one continuous wall and is the oldest wall in Dublin. So it's going to be interesting to watch how that one, and that's all dry laid. Might be a few patches that are cement, but that's the oldest wall. I think that'll be interesting to watch that one and how it progresses. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me, Megan.
No. We're honored to have you. Megan and Jen, do you have the information you need for a recommendation to City Council?
So one more thing, if you wouldn't mind, I think we are clear on your thoughts for number 1 and number 2, and I think we have the input necessary to draft those recommendations to council. Could we spend a little time talking about number 3? I know Tom shared his thoughts on that. I'm not sure I heard many other thoughts on ARB involvement. So currently, the historic stone walls within the public right-of-way would not fall under the purview of ARB. So we're interested in knowing your thoughts on that.
Megan, can you help me understand what we would be asking ARB to do? In my mind, and this is my just initial simple thinking, is the wall is either repaired and in good standing or it is not. Like there's not, what would we ask them to do? Would they determine if the wall was in good standing?
So I think Jenny could share, because currently historic walls on private property would fall under the purview of ARB. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jenny. So we're just noting that distinguishing fact. But Jenny, if you wouldn't mind addressing that.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if it's being maintained, we wouldn't need to have any ARB input. I think it would really be only if we were suggesting that it be reconstructed in a different manner or something was different as part of some CIP initiative or something that Bob recognizes that we would need to make alterations to that. Then we could potentially get ARB's involvement, similar to what we would do on private property. So I guess we just want to make sure we're.
But then that would accompany an application of sorts, right? Something was happening there, either
on private property, yes, but not in the right of way. That's not typically something that ARB would get engaged in, because that's largely a council, usually be related to some CIP project that council has initiated or approved already.
So for example, maybe as part of a CIP project, we determine that this wall needs to be completely replaced. Would we want to have that go through the ARB or not? I guess is
and for an informal opinion,
right.
You know, Tom pointed out, for example, the South High Street shared use path, that final phased, where, you know, I know that came up with Councilmember Fox. So just wanted to know your thoughts on that process.
My thought is, if it is a historically significant wall, then in the public right of way, which is what this says, historically significant stone walls located in the public right of way, including those outside the historic district. So it's a historic wall. It's falling down. Should we consult the Architecture Review Board? I suppose probably. Why not? I guess I would ask. We want to make sure that those walls are maintained with similar integrity and quality of, you know, how that wall would have been constructed originally.
Chris, are you in agreement with that?
In theory, sure. I'm trying to think of how something that would, trying to think of a scenario that would lead us to this place. And you know, most CIP things, if it would involve rebuilding of a stone wall, right, would trigger an application. We've always taken all of those applications before the appropriate board or commission. So I would say yes. In theory, I have no problem with it. I'm just trying to think. I just don't want to make another line in the code that, you know, just cause. If it's a problem, I don't want something in the code to be in search of a problem. If there is a problem, let's provide a solution, but let's not provide a solution in search of a problem.
May I weigh in? Comment.
Please, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, the ARB is the only forum by which the residents of the historic district have a voice, or is the primary forum. And the walls, if you change the walls in the district, going back to Andy's comment, if it's a wall in the historic district, it means something very, very near and dear to the residents of the district. So if you want to change something, like take away a wall or modify a wall, especially remove a wall in the historic district, that cuts deeply to the residents of the historic district. And the ARB is the only primary forum by which they have voice. So that's why it would be important to go to the ARB.
Okay, I think I hear a consensus on these historic walls being sent to the ARB. Is that good enough for Megan and Jen? Is that what you wanted to know about?
Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay. Is there anything else on this topic that we should be discussing tonight? Sir, go ahead. JM?
It's JM Rayburn from the planning department.
JM, go ahead, please.
The only consideration I would ask for the committee is there are some atypical stone walls, particularly in the historic district. So when they are under review, would it be the preference that they're replaced like for like if they're atypical, or do you want the dry laid look more uniform in the district?
I think that's a great question. Like that house on South High Street, the south end of the district on the east side of the road. I think it's the old Carr house originally. You know, it has an atypical stone wall. This is how big of a nerd I am. Every time I drive by that wall, it bothers me because it doesn't, you know, it's the old Sesame Street song starts playing in my head. If one of these things is not like the others, right? And so I would say if you have an atypical stone wall and you are doing a redevelopment on the property, that you need to revert to the traditional Dublin stone wall.
Oh, no.
That's just me.
No, that is a great story. No.
So this is again a matter of taste.
Subjective.
It's subjective. And so let me give you an example why Tom is saying, oh no. So when we bought our house, the previous owner had changed some of the porches to his liking. And when we bought the house, we said those porches are not original to the house. And certain ARB members said, yes, they may not be original to the house, but they tell the story of how that house changed over time. And I basically said, I found the post from the original porch out in the barn. I want to rebuild it the way it was. And they finally conceded. My point is that wall has a certain personality. It doesn't fit your tastes, and it doesn't fit the Dublin look, the Irish look. But some would argue that if it's a historical wall, if it was built before some time, I don't know what that year is, 1920 or before, then you could make the argument that it's been part of that property for so long, it's part of the identity of that property. And it evokes that, oh God, for certain people. And maybe that's, for all we know, maybe that's what the original homeowner intended. We don't know.
Okay.
So I could go either way on that. I could swing one way or the other.
How about you, John?
Well, okay. I got to look at this wall now. Now I'm nervous about it, Chris. I got to see why this wall is so ugly. You got me worried. I think
a picture of it. We have a picture of it.
I think the historical.
I'll try to find it. Hang on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and we're familiar with that wall because Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've received a call requesting that we perform maintenance on that wall.
Oh boy.
So
Well, worth noting that.
What is this exactly? The location? I'll try to find it.
Well, while you're
24
looking,
South High.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so
24 South High.
You don't need to bring it up, Bob.
I
mean, this very discussion, it's the subjective nature of this, which is why we wanted to have the conversation about process, because for CIP projects that are, asset management type of maintenance projects, those come to be through discussion. Staff will propose a Stonewall maintenance project for 2022, and there'll be a little bit of discussion during the CIP update on that. And then the next time council would see that would be at the bid acceptance. And we wouldn't take those through any boards or commissions as we develop that project. Now, sometimes informally, like the South High Street streetscape project, that's going through an informal process. But currently our processes do not call for those types of maintenance projects to go through any sort of input process.
Do you want to know the story on that? It's actually very quick.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. J.M. Snoffer, or J.L. Snoffer, who owned the quarry, had the house built in about 1920, 1930, don't recall. And when he had a housewarming or a house opening, he invited people, all his friends in for a housewarming or house opening. And he said, bring a stone from your farm for my fence, but don't bring limestone. I have all the limestone I need in the quarry. So they brought field stone, and the fence is all field stones, quartz and all other kinds of stone. So he has the only non-limestone fence in Dublin, and it's beautiful.
Okay.
But that's what he told people. I don't bring limestone. I've got all the limestone I need. I run a limestone quarry.
So we got a bunch of granite that rolled down from Canada during the Ice Age, and that's what people pulled out of their yard, and that's still all made out. So, okay, Tom, and I think I'm going to have to agree that, that's a unique story. But I think when rebuilding a regular wall, and if you read the book on these Irish walls, they are pretty much like ours. They're dry laid so that they'll last at time, and they didn't really do that much. This ain't like the Romans, the Italian part of England, where they use more masonry because they were taught by the Romans. Ireland was free from that occupation period, so they did lay them dry, and then with the stacking top. So my suggestion from the committee, and I hope they agree with this, I don't know, Mr. Rayburn, is that we preserve the ones we've got that are unique, and if we have to replace them, we replace them in the standard Irish style. Is that okay? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Well, we got.
Yeah, I mean, my comment was only if they were going to redevelop them, not that they would take them down and replace them, but if redevelopment were going to happen, i.e. that house was going to redevelop, right, then this wall would redevelop with it. That was my point. I'm not interested in tearing apart that wall.
Someday there's going to be a talking thing, and you'll walk up to that wall, and you're going to ask the wall, why are you unique? And we're heading for this right now at the Veterans Committee to explain, the graves of the veterans. And someday you'll walk up there, and then, Tom, you'll be just telling this story about how these people picked up rollers from Canada that came down, they get pushed down. And it's sort of a rather cool story, really. I mean,
yes.
It's history. It's, we love history, and, the more unique, the better. Okay, do we have enough information? Andy, do you have something else you want to say?
I was just going to say, if I were to put what Chris said into my words, it would be, if it's a wall with historic significance, it should be preserved in its current form. If preservation is no longer feasible, the wall shall be replaced with dry stack, something like that.
Okay. Now, are we squared away, Jen and Megan? Do we have all the information you want? And Mr. Rayburn and the rest of the team and Bob and all you guys? And
yes, very helpful discussion. We will go ahead and draft those up for you.
Yeah, because we have a time limit on these meetings, so we have to move on.
I know.
Children have a time limit on dinner, so keep moving.
I know. Chris.
Thank you, Tom. Have a good vacation.
Chris worked last night so hard to run through that meeting till 9:30, and she's exhausted. I can see her just sitting there cooling out. All right, Tom, thank you for joining us from South Carolina. The rest of the team, we love
Best
you.
to Gail, Tom.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you for the direction.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bob and Tom, you should have a radio show.
Yeah, and yeah. And if you want to stay, and listen to the next topic, Jen's going to give us a short version of planning update, Jenny Roush, and then we're going to get into urban chickens. So
I may pass on that. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
all right, Jenny, you're up.
Okay, I'll be quick. Since you're familiar with planning, I hope this will be just refresher, and we can talk through again more questions maybe than anything. And I really want to just highlight some of our metrics that we're working on. So I wanted to provide just a quick org chart just so you can see how planning is functioning these days. And as you'll see, we have our administration sort of at the top with myself and our support staff, and then we really have our planning division divided into sort of 4 categories. So current planning, obviously with Claudia's vacancy, that senior planner spot, as well as then Deviani leaves 2 spaces, and we're finalizing our interview process for those to be filled. But looking at, again, current planning, long range planning, and strategic planning, and then we have our staff members that fall within and support those 3 sort of sections of our planning entity. And then we obviously have code enforcement, who deals with on a daily basis, just making sure that our rules and things are met and followed through. So again, like I said, we're working on filling our vacant staff positions. So as you're aware of the planning function, I mean, we're really looking at the long-term vision, sort of the gamut, right? Long-term vision, planning documents to development applications, inspections, especially review also from a zoning perspective when building permits are filed. So making sure that those align with what was approved by council or planning commission, as well as the annual inspections by our zoning group, as well as then code enforcement when we have any issues. In terms of the major things that we are looking at and facing or have faced, again, really looking at how we're implementing council's goals and directives. As I'm sure you're aware and seeing that you're on your agenda, we've had a number of long-range projects and planning coming forward. So code amendments, particularly the historic district, we're getting ready to wrap that up, but obviously DCAP and West Innovation and how we're tackling those. As well as the 2035 visioning and framework. That's a big project for us. Major code updates too. And then also wanted to highlight how we've adapted during the pandemic, and really proud of our staff for not losing any momentum with the development application review, meetings with applicants, board and commission review. I mean, we had a lot of opportunities for that to be really challenging, and our staff did an amazing job of using our new implemented software management system where people can submit plans online and be reviewed digitally. So our staff was able to continue our business practices with no hiccups related to applications, which during the stay-at-home, I think I told Council Member Keeler via email, he had asked me about the implementation of that software, and we would have been in a world of hurt had we not had that software up and running. So people trying to submit paper applications would have been really challenging. So obviously lots of activity in the historic district and how we're addressing that, and then again just looking at our larger compliance and enforcement activities, and how that impacts our daily work. So I wanted to talk through with you all about some software that we are working with Brandon Brown and his division on, of how to demonstrate some of the things that we're working on in a meaningful way that you all would eventually be able to see and we can share with you. And this is just one example of a piece of this software that I'm sorry, it's really tiny, but looking at the historic district code and guidelines process and showing you over the course of time. So you'll see the quarters are along the top from 2018 to now. And then we have it subdivided into some major headers, which are project initiation, staff and consulting, drafting, public input, board and commission review, and then adoption and completion. So our goal is to have this for each one of our long range projects, so you can follow along of here's where we start, here's where we think we're going to end, and then where we are in real time. And I do want to highlight the public input aspect of this, in that you can then see where we've had public meetings And we will be able to account for that in a more holistic way, because that's something that's definitely discussed regularly of, how did we engage the public? What types of engagement have we had? And we really want to be able to show that to council and the public of where we are with these projects and what those look like, as well as then our reviews by our boards and commissions. So that's a big piece of what we're working on. In addition to, I wanted to then show you some snapshots that Brandon has put together that provide sort of a landing page in general for planning on this ClearPoint software that, again, gives the overview of planning and what that's about, but also the opportunity to show more robustly what some of the metrics that we've discussed and talked through with, I believe, this committee almost maybe a year and a half ago, of how to use our new software. And again, just for your awareness, looking at things such as when someone submits an application, how long does it take them to get review comments? How long does it take them to get a decision by a board or commission? And being able to set some parameters and some timeframes around those items in a meaningful way. So we can, is there a way to expedite our process or look at information and process things differently? And again, we can show our yearly commercial inspections and the types of inspections. So it has a really great way of showing all these various details. And when you're in the live environment, you can click on and hover over and drill down as deeply as you want into each of these things. So you can either give a really broad overview or get really specific. So ultimately, I just wanted to give you a snapshot of what we're working on to just show you how we're working, what our trends are looking like, and you can see all the hard work that planning is doing. And in the end, I think Brandon's going to be before you in one of your council workshops just to dive into the metrics further. But that's, I guess, in a quick 30-second snapshot, what we're working on here.
Thanks,
Okay.
Jenny. That's interesting. I have one question for you, and it really isn't any of my business, but hey, here. In the planning vacancies that you have in the senior planner spots, this is the world according to me, and I have no authority over anything, so there you have it. But it would really be nice to have somebody in one of those in strategic planning that had some architecture background. I don't know if you've advertised for those jobs or if you're doing that now, but having lived in that space a long time, to have strategic planning, if you had someone with an architecture capabilities that early on in the process would be really helpful, I think, for everybody in the system. So
yeah, I appreciate that. And I, as a follow-up to, I think all the interviews that you and Vice Mayor DeRosa did, that definitely came forward as a recommendation, and Planning Commission has actually discussed that as well, as how to support them better from an architectural perspective. So we are looking at how we can best support that, and we'll be coming forward with some recommendations on how to do that, because that is definitely something we've heard loud and clear that needs to be addressed. And how we're going to do that, we'll be coming forward with some tangible things to make that happen.
great, thanks. That's all I had.
That's a great point. Thank you.
That's exciting stuff. That'll be good. Those will be good reporting documents.
I think so too.
Jen, and that also could be a landscape architect with really extensive background. That might even be more helpful for you in solving design problems. I don't know. We've never really, in the 30 years I've been here, mastered the use of really good landscape architects, so we could cut out a lot of our contracts that we let for planning and things. And I just think if you got somebody with a high skill level, we could save an awful lot of money on projects, and they could also bounce around and get down to examining the different zonings and say, okay, here's what's wrong with this zoning. The buffering ain't right. I mean, early in the process, they could help the planning department solve a lot of problems, and they should be an integral part of that. Or, we need increased screening. Density is too high, setbacks are wrong. And that's really in the preview of a landscape architect who's also trained in civil engineering, according to their national exam. And so I agree with Chris. It could be an architect. It could be a landscape architect. And Chris is probably thinking, And so am I. You're looking at a project and you look at the dormer, or it needs dormers, the houses are, just poorly conceived. And God knows we reviewed enough of these things in our lives. So, even, having an architect and a landscape architect would be very, very, very helpful. So that's just my take on it.
Yeah, Jenny and I have had a couple of meetings recently to talk about architectural support specifically. And, one example of the way that planning has been using contractual architectural support was with the maintenance of the stone walls. You saw there was one slide that, where planning staff reached out to the architect that we have on board that specializes in historical nature. And, we take that feedback and then we incorporate that into our work. So that's just one example of how they've been using them. We talked about expanding our portfolio of architects that we have available on contract, maybe one for commercial, one for residential. Those are just some of the things that we're considering as to how we can expand the use and get them involved earlier in the process.
It'd be nice if we could pick up a retired, who doesn't have any ties. Of course, that's always been the problem. And I know
that is part of the challenge.
Dana mentioned that the other day, they get ties to architectural firms or whatnot. Hopefully we could find a retired landscape architect or architect who's not really tied to anybody. And because I could see this person as a troubleshooter who bounces all around solving problems. And I see a myriad bunch of problems in different departments, not just in planning, but other things where we're having crises over this or that setback or whatever, where that person could be invaluable and save us a pile of money. So that's just what I'm suggesting. So,
and really having their input, some of the new materials that are proposed to be used, it'd be good to have, an architect's opinion on those.
Yeah.
So yeah, we hear you loud and clear and we're working on it.
Bring on the chickens.
No. All right. Next issue is, Jenny, are you leading the attack on the chickens?
Yeah, I'm leading the attack on the chickens.
No.
Not a negative way.
Okay.
Like mine, Parmesan with angel hair.
Right, especially now. I'm about hungry. So no, I'll try to keep it real short. So in your memo, we provided some background about 2 previous instances in the last 5 or 6 years where residents have come forward and asked for council to consider making modifications to the code to allow chickens and keeping of chickens outside of the rural zoning district, which is currently where that's the only district in the city where that's permitted to be, because we would consider that agriculture. So in the first instance in 2015, council direction was to make no changes to that. In the most recent request, which was almost a year ago, council just requested additional time for us to consider this given the pandemic, and we were not in the mindset to be dealing with that. So before you today, we're just here to get some guidance on whether you would want us to consider either retaining the current regulations, which is only permitting chicken or poultry husbandry under agricultural, which would only be permitted in the rural district, whether we should consider a code amendment to permit these in other residential districts. And then I think another layer of that, if we were going to do a code amendment, we could also then look at requiring a special permit approval as part of that. So again, we just wanted to get your feedback on how we would move forward to council or not with any modification.
Jenny, if I can lead out on this, I would like to suggest, and I'm embarrassed because New York City allows these, Cleveland allows chickens. I mean, I don't know who we think that we're so special that we can't allow this kind of thing to happen. But when you do this, and if we're in agreement of doing this, there is a special way this has to be done. I just visited my granddaughter in South Carolina. There are mobile cages that actually push around the yard, and the chickens eat all the bugs in the yard and they fertilize the yard. And, as you know, in most of these codes, it's limited to 3 or 5 chickens, and they're all female, and there's no roosters, so that there's no, noise. And having lived down there with my granddaughter and seeing her take these chickens out and hug them and pet them, and then it's the excitement of reaching in there and getting their eggs. But what I'd like to do, if I'm suggesting this, is no, you don't build a chicken coop in your backyard. Last thing I want to see in this city. You buy these new systems, or you can actually get them online. They have wheels, and you move the chickens around. And I think one of the things that bothers me about the modern urbanized American, I was always interested in the rural kids, the way they took care of their horses, and they were into all these different things, winning awards. The modern urban kid, child, doesn't really have that opportunity. I watched how much their care was in taking care of these chickens, and it's almost like having a paper route. You know, a lot of obligation, a lot of care of the chickens, bringing out, shavings to them, feeding them. But I don't want to draw rats. And so there are these mobile, and if you write this ordinance, it'd have to be written in such a way that this chicken thing moves around, because I've seen them in Clintonville all over the place, and there's pre-made kits of these things. So we don't draw rats, but we are environmentally conscious about doing this. And I think one of the saddest things in my life was watching that family of 4 or 5 kids when we told them they couldn't have their chickens anymore, or they had to leave Dublin. That was not one of my happiest moments here. And also the Asian gentleman that had carrier pigeons, and we made him get rid of his carrier pigeons, and he loved those pigeons, and they weren't bothering anybody. But because of our zoning laws, those exceptions weren't made for these people. So I hate to be the last feather in the dog's tail, so to speak, and be the last city that finally wakes up and says, urban chickens are really cool. I polled all my people in my office, and they said, "Oh my God, you guys don't have urban chickens?" I said, "No, we haven't," because city council was adamant that they had this agricultural zoning, and no, they couldn't bend with, the times. But it's really interesting. These chickens are, I actually get them as pets. They're beautiful. They have crazy hairdos, crazy colors. Their eggs are blue and yellow and pink and white. And the kids are so excited to go find the eggs every day, and they pet their chickens. So I don't think I have the right to deny children this joy or this opportunity to sort of learn to take care, rather than just walking a dog or a cat that doesn't require any care. That, I don't think I have the right to deny them this particular aspect of humanity where they'd actually be responsible for taking care of something like chickens. So I just don't want the rats. I think if we write this thing, it has to be the mobile kind of cages that you push around. And with that, I think we protect ourselves from all the attacks by people who said, "Oh my God, we're having chickens next door." No. You can have chickens, but the chickens have to be screened either with plants or something. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do this where we could still allow these people to enjoy having some kind of activity with an animal other than a dog and a cat. That's sort of going to help them in a. These people are, these urbanized kids are totally, and Chris can attest to this because she was in this business. They're totally anymore devoid of any understanding of nature or the seasons. And it's really sad, really. So that's my soliloquy on why we should probably have a chicken ordinance. Chris?
I would defer to my fellow council member in the checkered shirt.
Okay. Well, so I agree with John. I think that it can be done sensibly. No roosters. Limit, say 5 per parcel. 150 feet to the nearest home. Things like that. No free range chickens. So, getting into the weeds a little bit in terms of what John was talking about, pests and all those things. Chickens like to be outside, and the quaint, cute thing to do is to open the door of the coop and let the chickens roam the neighborhood and eat everybody's bugs and whatever. That's not an appropriate thing to have in the middle of Dublin. So instead, each coop has a run that is attached to the coop. So you open a door, the chickens leave the coop, they go into the run, they get to eat the bugs, and then they go back in at night. But they're not roaming around. As far as aesthetics and things, I suppose you could limit the size of the actual coop. If it's, again, for 5 chickens, you know, you could look it up on the internet and figure out how big that coop should be or whatever. I'm not I wouldn't necessarily mandate that it's a mobile coop. I think someone that's starting out would probably buy a mobile coop and push it around the yard. But I would hesitate. I would hesitate to mandate that. I do see merit in it. From, as John pointed out, if you move it, it gives the chickens new area to forage, so they're not foraging in the same place. I don't know if any other community that I've looked at. I looked at Worthington, the city of Columbus. I don't know that any other communities require that, and I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't have concerns that we're going to have 1,000 chicken coops across the city of Dublin. I believe that neighborhood HOAs are going to probably put the kibosh on a lot of these. There may be 5 or 10 residents in the entire city that would do this if you allowed it. 5 of those are in HOAs that are going to tell them they can't do it. So you have 5 residents, one of which is in Bel Air, which I think is it looks like it's a fairly large parcel, backing up to some green space. So, you know, I guess I don't see it as a huge problem. The complaints that were lodged against folks that had chickens were a good bit of roaming, having the chickens not, you know, leaving their property and going on to neighbors' property, and we can eliminate that by requiring that the chickens are kept in the coop or in the run. So my 2.
No, thank you very much, Andy, because I don't know if you remember this, but when you used to buy 5 gallons of gas, you got a chicken, and you went home with it. Of course, you know, those chickens are all sexed, it's called, and so they were giving away roosters. They weren't giving away hens. And I'll tell you about roaming chickens. I had this chicken, and it was a pet, and it just sort of hung around the house. And all of a sudden, I was out one day, and this dog come tearing through the yard, grabbed that chicken, and away went my pet rooster, never to be seen again. He grabbed that thing by the throat, and it was gone. So anybody who's dumb enough to let their chickens roam around, probably like myself, probably will not have very many chickens for long. So you're absolutely right on. But since major cities across America allow this, and I got to say, the younger people, which it interests me, the 25 to 45 group are real interested in urban chickens. I mean, this is like really a cool thing. So if we're going to be as cool as we think we are with Bridge Street and all these other things, then we probably should have an ordinance that says, you know, you can have chickens under pretty extreme requirements. And that's what I'm voting with you on that. Chris?
I'm a no on chickens, so I am an ag girl. I grew up, I raised ducks and rabbits, both for sale when I was a kid. Lived on a little more than an acre, and when I was in college, when I was in ag school, there were 3 chicken facilities there at Don Scott. One was reproductive gene study for chickens, one was layers, and then one was food production chickens. And some of the least favorite days of my entire life were spent in those chicken coops while I was in ag school. It is one of the most foul smells that I have ever encountered. I'm not the only thing that I hear is worse is a corpse. I hope to never come across one of those and not have something to compare it to. But if we were to look at it, the lot size would be very important. I think of the neighborhood across from the high school. If you had chickens up and down Terra Hill, you know, we're not allowing fencing. We're not allowing any of these things because we wanted these views, these vistas, and, you know, it's going to be very disruptive. And I don't disagree with anything either of you said, but for the 5 or 10 people that Andy illustrates that would be interested in doing this, we are going to create 150 miserable ones. And really, it isn't about the chickens as much as it is about neighbors. I am not very interested in adding another layer of discontent to our HOA people. Then now we're going to fight about chickens too, because council said you can have them. So I'm a no on chickens, but you know what? This is America, and a 2-to-1 vote is a 2-to-1 vote, and I am totally comfortable with it. You don't have to try to talk me into it. I will lose graciously.
Well, you know, if you get on the internet and look up omelet that has these chicken pre-made.
I just said you don't have to talk me into it. Did you hear me say that? You don't. My mind isn't going to change. I respect your opinion, and I totally understand it, and I'm okay with it. But I'm a no chicken.
Okay, Jenny, we have a 2 vote for chickens. Investigate chicken legislation that would probably make us happy. I really think, and I believe this because I see so many young people moving in with little kids now, especially in my neighborhood, and I'm meeting them. I think there's going to be more people that are going to raise these things and enjoy them. And I think this is another, and I probably wouldn't go for rabbits because they got to be put in a hutch, but I saw how the chickens are done. And the mobile opportunities are not, but it's pretty cool that, you know, it was good to just see kids so dedicated to a farm animal in an urban setting, and a farm animal that doesn't make any noise. It just exists there and they're taking care of it. And it was really sort of neat, really. So, you know, everybody in my office, I got a bunch of young architects, probably 8 of them, and every one of them is so pro chicken. They think we're lunatics for not having this legislation. So, I don't know. I'm trying to move with the times a little bit on this, but I agree with what you said, Chris. I've been to, you know, chicken ranches and chicken houses where there's 100,000 chickens crammed in there, and it's not a good deal. But I also learned in this last week that I stayed with chickens that there wasn't any odor. The way it worked out was really pretty neat. All the things that went on, the feeding, the techniques of taking care of these chickens, the kids' excitement when they opened up the little box that comes in these pre-made places and pulling an egg out, and oh my God, and, you know, they make an omelet out of it and they're so excited. I don't think I have the right to take that away from people if, you know, every other city's doing it. So, all right. So that, Jenny, is that enough for the chickens?
We're good. There's model ordinances out there that have a lot of the things you're talking about and addressing that. So, you know, we'll obviously need to take this forth to council to make sure they're all on board with it, but we can definitely look into all those things and appreciate your guidance on how to move forward.
So we have a recommendation for urban chickens is what we have right now on a 2-to-1 vote. Okay. Well, is there anything else before the good of the committee?
John, we need to approve the meeting minutes. We didn't do that at the beginning of the meeting. So I make a motion to approve the meeting minutes as submitted. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Andy.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes, I presume. And let's all get to dinner. We are 3 minutes from the closing time of this thing, so we're doing okay. And thank you for your time, and thanks for all the great comments. I think you resolved a lot of issues tonight as a team, and it's all about the team. There's no I and we, and so again, we have a great group of people doing great things. So, and thank you, staff, for being patient and putting up with us and bringing forward these interesting issues. So with that, I'd like to adjourn the meeting.
Good night, everybody. JM, I haven't seen you in forever.